Happy holidays, everybody. It's the Energy is Love podcast. It's that time of year when we're supposed to say happy holidays. So hopefully whenever you listen to this episode, that fits. Happy holidays. Everybody knows where you can find the Energy is Love podcast at energyislovepodcast.com. When you do go to the website, make sure you click on the Craig and Steph tab. You'll see it up top. There you can find out more about what me and my beautiful wife do as evolution coaches. So one of the things that we're most passionate about is the opportunity to help people in the experience of evolving into their fullest and greatest potential. And Steph and I work with clients, helping them in that space of not just realizing that evolution, but also understanding what it is that's keeping them in those spaces of feeling stuck. So click on the Craig and Steph tab at the Energy is Love podcast website, energyislovepodcast.com. Learn more about what we do, and then contact us and reach out and connect. We offer a variety of different programs that hopefully will suit your needs. And in the end, it's really all about embracing who we are as people so that we can live the fullest and most happy, joyful life. So go check it out. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our wonderful sponsor, Crystal Water Float Spa. We've had a recent episode with Lance Foss where we talked in great detail about floating and all of its benefits and all of the pros and cons. There's not really a big list of cons when it comes to floating, but if you haven't tried floating yet, Crystal Water Float Spa is the perfect place to do that. Come out to Crystal Water, located in Tooele, Utah, and climb inside one of their tanks, and then lay back and float for an hour. Experience the joy of floating in 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt. You can go to crystalwaterfloat.com or check out their Facebook page and learn more about floating, learn more about all the wonderful things that Crystal Water offers. Also, if you're online on their Facebook page or you go to their website, make sure you hop over to dream-pod.com where you can learn all about the amazing Dream Pods, which are the float tanks that Crystal Water has. Crystal Water is also the nation's distributor, the only distributor for the Dream Pods. So when you want your own tank and you want to open up your own center and you want to bring the benefits of floating to everybody that you know, contact Crystal Water Float Spa so you can get your Dream Pod. On this episode of the podcast, I got the opportunity to speak with Sarah Grace. I met Sarah through somebody else who's going to be on the podcast soon, Kayla McGuire. She referred me to Sarah, and I'm really glad that she did. Sarah is an energy practitioner and has incorporated all sorts of different modalities and certain things in regards to her life and the way that she works with people. She does soul retrieval, Reiki, mentoring, hands-on healing, some medical intuitive stuff as well. Just a whole bunch of really cool energy-related things. On top of being an energy guru, master, practitioner, shaman, whatever we want to call her, Sarah is also a paramedic, and she's been a paramedic for the past 15 years. And she wrote a book called Journey into Grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic. In the book, Sarah shares a lot of stories about her life as well as the experiences that she had as a paramedic. It was a great interview. Really insightful, really intriguing. Sarah's hilarious and fun, and she has that really easy way of approaching some difficult subject matter, which I think helps. So go find her book. You can download it on Kindle. You can also purchase it on Amazon. Remember, it's the book title is Journey into Grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic. You can also go find Sarah at sarahkgrace.com is her website. Obviously, she's on Facebook and Instagram and everything else too, but go check her stuff out and click the links in the show notes. And now you get to sit back and relax and enjoy this wonderful episode with an amazing woman, a paramedic, an energy practitioner, an energy healer, a psychic, an intuitive, a clairvoyant, a medium, a shaman, anything else you want to call her. It fits because Sarah's amazing. So enjoy this episode. And Sarah, thank you for taking the time. Sit back, folks, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Podcast for the Universe. Here we go.
You're listening to the Energy is Love podcast.
Energy is love.
The Energy is the Love podcast.
The Energy is Love podcast.
Energy is love.
The Energy is Love podcast.
The podcast for the universe.
The Energy is Love podcast.
Well, good morning, Sarah. Thank you so much for taking the time and the opportunity to sit down with me. I appreciate it.
Good morning, Craig. Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
I guess it's still kind of morning when you're at where you're at, right? You live in California?
It is. It's 11:11. Of course it's 11:11, right?
That's perfect.
Right? Cannot make this up.
Yeah, we timed that one, right? So I have a whole bunch of stuff that I want to ask you about. I was going through and looking at not just your website and some of the stuff on Facebook and everything like that. And so I'm really excited to get the chance to talk with you. But first off, I want to kind of, when it comes to, because we'll get into all the things that you kind of do and all the kind of different aspects of who you are and all that kind of stuff. But I want to know when you first came to, well, what's the first memory that you have of experiencing energy or working with energy or seeing energy or whatever you want to call it?
My experience with high sense perception and just being able to see, hear, and feel energy outside of the normal five senses came on when I was 7. And I vaguely remember going to bed, quote unquote, normal. And then one morning I woke up and I was able to see aura colors and different kind of variations of frequency around people's bodies and buildings and plants and trees and things. And then over the course of a period of about 2 weeks, it continued to increase in terms of sensation and energy, like just the things that I was able to perceive. So then I started to hear thoughts and feel other people's feelings and have kind of precognitive, just kind of know what was going to happen before it happened. And so it really came on for me spontaneously when I was 7.
Did it freak you out initially? Like, what was your kind of understanding of it at that young of an age?
Well, it's really interesting, Craig, because I was raised in a very small and conservative area in South Dakota. And this is pre-internet, so there was not any real connection to the outside world. And my family was pretty religious. And so when I started, I'm 7 years old, I wake up and I start seeing, spirits and ghosts and energy and whatever. And I'm like, oh, well, this is just what it is. I was like, this must be what everybody's experiencing because this is just what is. And so when I finally said something, to my family, they were like very quick to tell me, no, that's not acceptable. And we don't talk about that. And if you do talk about that, essentially it's, eternal condemnation and potentially being sent away type thing. So then I really internalized a lot of fear around it because then I thought that something was really wrong with me, for being able to perceive these things. And that really started kind of the coming to terms with process for myself that took 25 plus years. Yeah.
So with that in mind, you said that you kind of started to have a lot of fear surrounding it. And I mean, you had kind of that negative stigma attached to it in a sense because of your upbringing and your family and everything like that. Did you find that, did you just completely internalize it and stop talking to people about it and it still kind of existed in a sense, or did you kind of shut it off?
No, it's continued to exist, and I did just stop talking about it. And what I started to do was isolate myself a lot more, and I started to exercise, and I would go for long, long runs out in the prairie, kind of on the reservation. And it's very interesting because I grew up 45 minutes from where all the pipeline stuff is happening right now. So
Really?
it's very interesting, energetically for me, that area. And so as I would be out kind of on we were right on the border of the reservation, just very open land and in the prairie. And I would still be having these impressions and awareness and spirits and just all of these visions kind of coming to me. And so I really just started to turn it inward and kind of not talk about it externally, but really started to have a cycle of toxic shame forming and really wondering what was wrong with me and why it wouldn't just go away. I really at that point just really wanted it to go away.
So what was the point where you really started to kind of make peace with it and kind of come to terms with it and understand it even more? Because, I think in everybody's spiritual path and journey and blah, 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 however we want to label it, I think that we have a re-remembrance. So we go back to our childhood or we go back to certain time periods in our life where we can kind of correlate and understand. My guess is at the age of 7, you don't realize that you're kind of seeing auras or that you're seeing energy in a sense. So at what point did you kind of go back and realize and be able to draw some correlation between, putting some sort of parameters around what you had been experiencing most of your life?
It really wasn't until I was much later in life. As a result of pretty violent upbringing and in coupled with seeing a lot of the energies and things the way that I was seeing them, I went out into the world kind of without a stable foundation, not a sense of really strong belonging or feeling as though I knew who I was, and kind of on top of that with all of the high sense awareness and just feeling like I was energetically overstimulated. So what I did was I moved all over the country and I did a lot of different kind of wild and crazy things while I was trying to establish a sense of identity for myself and a sense of power. And all of that is chronicled in my book. And I went off the rails and I did a lot of things and I learned a lot at the same time. But to answer your question specifically, I finally got myself together and became a paramedic. And so I've been a paramedic now for 15 years. And in the 911 system, the energy just started to come through me. And it was nothing I was trying to do, but I became that paramedic who was always there the last 10 or 15 minutes of life for people. And I had the honor, really, now I see it as an honor to witness countless people transition. And I look at it now as midwifing. Well, initially I didn't know what the hell, I was just trying to be a paramedic and trying to do my job, so to speak. And then what would happen for me is as the person was taking their last breaths in front of me or having their fear, as they're looking and facing their own imminent mortality, I would begin to watch the chakras releasing from the body and then the soul going out the crown of the head. And then oftentimes I would either see celestials coming in or loved ones that had crossed over. And then we're sitting here doing CPR and things like that. And so essentially I spent probably upwards of 8 years or 10 years where I was still not willing to say anything externally about it because I still had a lot of fear. And I had finally established myself in a powerful, esteemed, identity and position. And I really didn't want to jeopardize that by saying anything. But my coworkers could feel, they were just like, what are you doing? Because the energy would shift on scene the second I would start to work on people. And it was this thing. So after about roughly 8 years and watching enough people die and witnessing, I was like, this cannot be bad. How could this possibly be bad? I was able to really help people find a little bit of calm or a little bit of peace as they were in that state, and then helping them into or just witnessing their transition while helping the family members and things like that. And so it was at that point, and that's roughly about 8 years ago now, that I finally was like, okay, what is this? I want to get educated on this. I want to know what this is. I want to know why this is, and that for me, that really meant facing a lot of my own shadow, facing a lot of my own fear and my own judgment around, the concept of psychic or energy or any of it.
I'm amazed. I'm super excited. That's why when I, came across your stuff and it's Kayla, that's how you pronounce her name, right?
Kayla. I love Kayla. Yeah.
She's the one that pointed me in your direction and everything like that. So I was really excited. So your book, The Journey into Grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic. I have 1,001 different questions. First off, I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful that you've written the book and everything like that, because I share a little bit of common experience, I guess, and I'll give you a little bit of information or a little bit of background. So I used to be a police officer, and
nice.
I kind of experienced some of the same things in regards to being in those situations at those points in time when something incredibly, tragic or very traumatic is happening and taking place. And a lot of times there isn't very much that you can do, especially as a police officer. It's different if you're a paramedic, obviously, because you're the one that's working on the patient or whatever the case may be. But I would find myself in these situations where I would just end up holding space, essentially, where I would just be in that space of during that traumatic experience, whether it was somebody that had just passed or somebody that was in the process of it. And it was really kind of weird and strange and unique. And once I started to really kind of bring awareness to it and realize what it was and kind of what I could actually do in that space, then it became something, far less kind of frightening or scary or nerve-wracking, but just really beautiful, and the opportunity to be able to kind of be in those moments and hold that space.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I found your book, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And you've taken the time to actually write a book and share all these experiences. And so I want to go back a little bit though. You said you've been a paramedic for 10 years now. Is that right?
15.
15?
Yes, 15.
What originally kind of got you into that field, or why did you choose to go that route?
It's very interesting because intuitively, spirit or my higher awareness put paramedicine in my sphere several times throughout my life, but I was terrified of it. I was like, oh my God, I could never be a paramedic. I could kill someone if I mess up, Yeah. I didn't realize at the time that, you start at the beginning and then you have to go through a million steps before you're out running, really crazy calls and things. And so, I had enough kind of face plants in life where I was, just kind of all over the place with different, I went through substance abuse and I went through, all kinds of different things where I was really just working, you're just trying to find a semblance of safety within myself. Finally, it came around enough times, and I do chronicle exactly how I got to it at the book. Essentially, I was living kind of in a ghetto area of Los Angeles, and I was working part time at a gym and just wasn't really going anywhere with anything. And somebody was shot on the sidewalk right outside my apartment. And my intuition, when I kind of poked my head out and was looking at the scenes, and the ambulance was arriving and things. My intuition's like, this is what you need to do. And finally, by that point, I'd kind of had enough hard knocks and dead ends and just kind of been spinning around in a circle long enough where I finally was like, all right, you win, whatever, I'll do it. And so I went to the UCLA EMT program and went through that program. And then I started down, because I'm kind of one of those like go big or go home kind of people. I throw myself into the middle of the fire and then try to figure it out when I'm there, And yeah. So I started my career in South Central LA, in Greater Compton, Inglewood. And so that was really trial by fire, like literally, where I had to really figure out how to do it. It was utterly amazing. Yeah, for sure.
And then you fast forward and you said about within the last 8 years or so is when you kind of started having more awareness of the fact that you have an opportunity or a responsibility or an obligation, or however you want to kind of look at it, because of the position that you're in and because of the opportunities. Like you said, like it seemed like a lot of times you were the one that ended up going to that call or being, responding to that one incident when it would, because not everything that a paramedic deals with obviously is life and death.
Totally. Yeah. Lots of back pain and toe pain at 2 a.m. Yeah. Needs a refill on their prescription. Yeah. There's a lot of that too, of course. Depending on the area, I worked a lot of really urban environments initially. And then as I became a medic and got more seasoned as a medic, I worked more rural. And then I'd kind of do sometimes urban and sometimes more rural areas. It was really, I was definitely one of those black clouds, and a lot of the new EMTs loved working with me just because of that concept in EMS. I mean, you're familiar as a cop, what the black clouds, the people who tend to get all of the really gnarly calls, and I was definitely one of those people. And initially I was kind of like, whoa, geez, what is this? Why is this like this? And then ultimately over time, I kind of just started settling into and allowing the energy to, not trying to control it, but just allowing it to flow through me. And it was very tranquil, very Matrix-like. If, you can remember from being in that space as you're witnessing it, just everything slows down and the crystalline clarity opens, and it's just this knowing, it's like, this is what's happening, and being able to see it from multiple angles simultaneously, and so doing that for over a decade really empowered me. I think initially I was really just focused on harnessing my skills and really becoming a good paramedic. That was my predominant. And then the latter part of the time I was on the streets, I was really looking at blending the two. And my intuition for the last several years that I was on the streets, because I'm still a licensed medic, my private practice has gotten so busy that I'm not on the streets now. But essentially, my intuition was leading me more and more into what it is that I do now in terms of working with people one-on-one and doing energy realignments and all kinds of different things. But it was, really kind of this intuitively led thing. And I really had to, for me, it was a matter of overcoming my own stigma, my own fear around it. And then really just looking at like, okay, like I'll open to this, and I really I want it to be grounded. I want it to make sense. Like I've got a very linear paramedic mindset. And I hear a lot of kind of these words out there in the etheric community and the spiritual community. I'm like, that's great, you guys, but what does it mean here? You know, like how do we help here in this tangible reality with that? So for me, it was about becoming educated as to what this is, and then how we can utilize it in a really grounded way that helps us in our everyday life. So that's essentially what I've been doing.
That's awesome, because like you said, there is a lot of like in the spiritual community, or whatever you want to label it as, there's all these, these concepts and these ideas, and everything is so much, not everything, but a lot of times you'll find things that are more about love and light and the power of this and all of these kind of beautiful things that are really truthfully existent, I believe, and they're out there. But then it's like, how do you really incorporate any of that shit into every single day of your life? Where,
exactly. Yeah, it's like, well, how's it going to help you pay your power bill? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's people that are just so in it in life, and they're going through such trauma and such chaos, and they can't even, like, the concept of a lot of that stuff is so far away, And so what I love to do is be able to like relate to people like that and have conversations with people that are in that space, because because all of us, it's all of us. And now I look at it as less spiritual, less etheric, and just energy. Everything's just a different delineation of energy, the way that I see it, But I love taking it, like just talking to people who are really in it, and having a difficult time, because when we can help to remind them of their own personal power and their own choice point and their own, that kind of thing, then I really feel like reigniting the flame within the individual is kind of my MO. It's what I love to do.
You're on the right podcast, because I agree. Everything is just energy in one form or fashion or another. But
yay!
I wanted to know, like, as you kind of grow in the space of realizing all of these different things at the same time of being a paramedic, how did you see, or what were some of the ways that you kind of got to the point where you could see how your connection and your ability to kind of work with or be aware of energy, in a sense, helped you at your job and helped you when you were out there working?
It helped me more and more, because I would start attracting more calls where it wasn't just like, the dead bodies are relatively easy in terms of what we need to do energetically or per protocol, because the soul had already left. So then it was really just calming down the family members and dealing with getting the coroner called and that type of thing. And then what would happen is, the more I kind of became empowered and understood this, it was two-part. One was I would get more of the patients that would be transitioning right in front of me, or I was there and we got them to the hospital, but we were able to just it was about this, holding the space of just like love and acceptance. Right. And at the same time, it was really fascinating. And I really feel like you'll get this, because, a lot of my coworkers started being like, so what's up with you? Like, what, you're kind of glowing. Like, what's the deal? And so I started to kind of just talk and open up to them ever so slowly about what it is I was seeing. And some of them were kind of like, I don't know about that, but a lot of them I was really surprised. And then what started happening, Craig, it was amazing, is I would come to work, and it, like, every shift was like an adventure. You never know where you're going to go or which calls you're going to be on. And I never knew who I was going to work with. So it was always this amazing thing. And it was so fun, because then a lot of my coworkers started asking questions and started implementing and utilizing different strategies and techniques in their life. So it was really cool. Like, the more I opened into my awareness, just the vibration of how I was being, people became curious about it. And so that was really fun.
That is really cool. I think that happens for a lot of people, even in their own kind of, they don't necessarily have to be a paramedic or something like that, but even in their own space, when they start to kind of come out in a sense of, they believe in energy or some spirituality aspect of this or that or the other. I think that, because I talk to people all the time, and that's kind of the common thing where, they realize initially they're going to be concerned about people judging them, or some backlash, or some negative feedback. But I think in the end, people are more receptive and more open and curious. And did you have any negative, I guess, feedback, or did you have any kind of negative repercussion, especially after you wrote the book and everything like that?
It's been very interesting, especially after I wrote the book. The book itself was a tremendous birthing for me, not only just in terms of, putting it out there to kind of the full spectrum of how it is I perceive reality. But really there was like no shadow left behind. And I put essentially all of my pain and all of my trauma in there. It was very cathartic for me. And at the same time, I was very vulnerable. I felt very, very scared and vulnerable. And at the same time, my intuition was just like, put it all in, just put everything in there. And what's been amazing, Craig, is that, that vulnerability and that rawness is really what's been, people have been reacting to and responding very positively to. And so from my coworkers, and it's like the most alpha dog, testosterone filled environment on the planet, like firefighters, cops, EMS, SWAT, it's all of that. And so I was like, here I am talking about spirits and shit, and I'm like, oh my God, and then I used to do all of these crazy wild antics, and I was like a pinup model, and I did all the stuff, because I was really vulnerable. And at the same time, I've had so many people like reach out to me from that period of my life that have just been like, wow, I knew something was up with you. I just didn't really know to the extent of what it was. And they'll come forward and be like, actually, I'm kind of like that too, which is really, really cool.
Well, did you find, because, this was kind of my experience too, and I'm sure, because it's vastly different. Obviously, police and paramedics do something completely different in the end. But did you find that the people that you worked with that were really, really good at their jobs, really, really not just, from one standpoint of they could dot all the I's and cross all the T's, but that were really, really good in working with patients and doing what was necessary and being able to handle themselves in situations of great trauma and stress? I think that people who are able to do that are naturally connected to their intuition and in a sense are working with energy, even though they might not have awareness of that fact. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, it totally resonates. Yeah, absolutely. And what's amazing is what I've come to understand now is, I had such fear for a long time as a result of my nuclear family upbringing and what I had been taught at the time. And what I've come to understand now is like, there's nothing weird about this. I mean, I might be kind of on the high end of the spectrum in terms of like the visual capacity, but everybody has intuition. Everybody has knowing. And exactly what you're saying, like it doesn't, not even just in like the first responder field, but physicians and hospice workers and nurses. There's so many people that are just really intuitively led and just have that sense of knowing. And yeah, some of the most powerful and potent providers that I've ever come across are those people who are just really willing to listen to their intuition and go with it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Specifically, like when you come into now that you have a greater understanding of all of these different things and your intuition and, the ability to tap into energy and work with it, see it, use it, and also help people with it. Because now you do hands-on healing with people and mentoring and all those type of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a specific modality? That was one of the things I wanted to ask you, or some area where you kind of find that you're more inclined, I suppose, because I think everybody has the full spectrum of capacity, right? And they're all just labels for different tools and skill sets in regards to working with energy. But do you have a specific one that you tend to is like a strength for you, I suppose?
That's a fantastic question. And I love how synchronistic a lot of our vantage points are, because I really look at all of these different modalities as branches of the same tree. And essentially when I finally surrendered and I went back to South Dakota and I faced my shadow and a lot of my core wounds, essentially after I did that, I was able to kind of surrender and just say, okay, spirit, fine. Clearly this is the way that I see. This is the way I perceive. It is what it is. Just show me which way to go. What do you want me to do? And so I started just with Reiki. And so to answer your question succinctly, the shamanic lineage would likely be my strength. You're not going to hear me proclaim myself or identify myself with any one particular genre, however, because I find that to be limiting. And so when I started, I opened to Reiki because it's like, dude, you can go to 7-Eleven and find a Reiki master anymore. It's like, there's so many. And it's like, So it was easily accessible. It was palatable. It was something I could understand, and it opened up my hands, so Reiki's awesome. And I love the availability and the openness to Western receptivity with it. I think that's fantastic. And then, so my hands were activated. And then from there, I went into mediumship training, and then I went into a lot of different shamanic branch lineage trainings, and then medical intuition. So that's kind of the full spectrum, plus the 15 years of Western background that I bring to the table. That being said, when I started working with individuals, I just listened to my intuition, and I just had my friends and family lay down in front of me, and I started just putting my hands on them. And I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and it was hysterical, Craig, because I was like a totally veteran medic by this point. I could just go out and run the gnarliest MCIs and not even blink, right? And then at the same time, when I started this, I was all nervous, I was like, oh my God, I want to do a good job. My little hands were all sweaty, I'm like, because what it was I felt like I was finally stepping into this aspect of myself that had always been there that I had denied. And so I wanted to do a good job, and I didn't know what that was at the time, which, just showing up in whatever capacity is doing a great job, Yeah. And so I listened. And so spirit, it just intuitively guides. So my strength is seeing. I see visuals 24/7, 365. It's just always there. Overlays, right? It's like standing at the back of Target or Best Buy in front of all of those different television monitors. And instead of them playing the same screen of information, all of them are playing different screens of information, and they're all blaring different information simultaneously. That's how I see reality. So the center screen is this tangible third dimension, right? And then outside of that, whether it's thought fields or, the structural components or energetics or emotions or trauma, whatever, I can see all that stuff. And that's just kind of a passing glance. But then what I figured out is when I put my hands on somebody, I can actually go into their physical structure. I can go into their body, into their memories, into their thoughts, their emotions, their traumas. And so that was a whole learning process, with that. And over time, it just developed into what it's developed. And now I like to, at the minimum, people who come to see me, and I love what I do now because it's still like being a medic. Like I never know what I'm going to get. Never know who's going to walk through the door, and that keeps it fun for me. And some people, have severe trauma. Some people have exacerbated disease process, anything from cancer to fibromyalgia to, I work with a lot of heroin addicts and meth addicts and alcoholics. And at the same time, I work with a lot of people who are just really energetically sensitive and intuitive and wanting to know how to work with their gifts. So it's the full spectrum, So to just sum all of that up again, the shamanic lineage in terms of the realignment of the energy bodies and the capacity to kind of vision or journey on behalf of someone else. That's really my strength. And at the same time, I utilize anything from medical intuition to mediumship to different shamanic lineage branches throughout the course of any given day. So
that's amazing. I want to ask you, if you could, break it down a little bit more in regards to how you see things and kind of, so if we take the person out there, because one of the things I love doing with the podcast and, that the idea and the thought is that somebody that's going to be listening to this somewhere who may have some experience something similar, maybe explain it to them in a way that they can understand it. So not necessarily, so they're not going to be afraid or they're not going to be nervous, but really understanding what it is that they're seeing. Does that make sense? Like break it down a little bit more.
Totally. Yeah. And I love that. And so it's really important, I think, that we reiterate what you just said, that if you're perceiving things like this, you're seeing ghosts at nighttime or, you're having just kind of this information or data coming in. Number one, you're safe, right? Number two, there's nothing wrong with you. And number three, there are ways to really ground down and implement these abilities in ways that you can actually thrive with. And so if somebody would have told me that 20 years ago, it would have saved me a hell of a lot of stuff, but here we are, and it's you and me now, and we can convey that to people. So that's what we're doing. It's very important to understand. So the ability to see, clairvoyance, clear seeing, I don't see with my physical eyeballs. Okay. I see all of my information in a screen that's about 2.5 inches, 2 inches or so off the left side of my head. And it's this constant kind of overlap. Do you remember those old school projectors back in that the teachers used to write on? They'd have that film and they'd put it on the projector and they would write.
Yeah.
Do you remember those?
Yeah.
Okay, well, think of those like those different films, okay? So if you're looking at a person, so say I'm just looking at you, and I can see your physical body. I can see the clothes you're wearing. I can see the color of your hair. Okay, so now put one of those films over the top of it and start to do it. A lot of the structural anatomy and the physiological makeup looks like gold and orange usually, vertical kind of numerology and different kind of pattern symbols. Okay, so the Matrix actually got that right. I very rarely see visuals out there in the movies that are accurate, but in terms of the vertical up and down stuff from the Matrix, that's actually very accurate, which I'm really excited because people can understand that.
And you're talking about the actual movie, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you remember that scene where they have the vertical information where it's like the up and down coloring?
Yeah, I remember that movie incredibly well. It shaped quite a bit of my teenage years.
Yeah. Well, that in terms of if you look at a tree, that's what the energetic information of the tree looks like. It's vertical patterning going up and down. Same with the building, same with the person, same with the dense matter that's kind of in a vertical structure. And then you put over the top of that, then we can look at emotions. So emotions are going to come in all different colors. Like, it cracks me up. It's so cute when people are like, what color is my aura? I'm like, all of them. Because it's not just one, It depends on where it is in the body and what's associated, etc. So then you overlay and just put a whole bunch of different colors over the top of that, and that comprises the emotions. And then if you were to put another film over the top of that, maybe it had green and gold kind of around the head a lot. That's what mental patterning and thoughts look like. And so do you see how it's kind of it's a layered, it's like Russian nesting dolls going all the way down to the original energetic blueprint of the person. Does that kind of make sense?
It makes total sense. For you personally, because I think just because that's how you see it may look different to me, it may look different to somebody else, and just because they see it differently doesn't mean that they're seeing something wrong, or that's another thing that I think we need to throw out there. But I want to ask you, oh shit. It's because I have so many questions and so they get lost. You're talking about rapid fire. Trying to remember now because it's one I really want to ask. You're talking about
seeing different ways.
Holy cow! I'm pissed. Well, if it comes back to me,
it'll come back. So I love that you just said that, and that's very important because a lot of people downplay the way that they perceive things because it may not be as full color panorama, whatever, as how it is that I see it. And at the same time, there's no comparison. Like, every person has their own abilities, their own skill set, their own unique blueprint, and it's theirs. And it's so unique and it's so amazing. And there's no need to cross compare or any of that kind of stuff. It's really like, okay, so if you see spirit, then is it a human spirit, right? Is it somebody that's crossed over? Okay, great. Well, that could potentially be mediumship, right? So then there's a protocol for that. How do you see them? How do you talk to them? Do you want to interact with it? Some people just see kind of the grid ley lines of the earth patterning, right? Some people see a lot of the medical intuitive stuff like I see, and there's no better than, less than. It all just is. And that's clairvoyance. And then on top of it, obviously, there's claircognizance, clairaudience, empathic, mediums. There's all of these different branches. And so it really is just kind of figuring out, like, well, how does the information come to me? Do you just feel things? Do you take on everybody's shit? Oh, okay. Well, you're probably an empath. So are you a body empath where you start to feel pain of somebody else's pain when somebody sits down and their knee hurts and all of a sudden your knee hurts? Or do you take on like the mental stuff where somebody's spinning out, mentally, and all of a sudden you're all scrambled and fuzzy headed? Or are you emotionally? Do you take on everybody's emotions? Oh, okay, great. So then we become, the more we become kind of aware of the way that it is we're taking on or perceiving the information, then we can really find a power in it, right? Because then it's like, oh, okay, wait a second. This is how the information comes to me. Now, what do I want to do with it? How do I want to respond? right? And you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, that's kind of the question that I had. I remember it did come back to me.
See, I knew we'd get back there if we just started.
How did you see your all these words that we use, in not just in this conversation and in the realm of spirituality, but just words in general, I think are asinine at times, but we'll just use the word gifts to make it easier for people out there listening. So how did you see your gifts evolve once you kind of brought more awareness to it and then start practicing? And then also, second part would be, how did you practice and start to kind of strengthen those things? Because I think if you do have the ability or the gift, or I think everybody does, but if you have the awareness of some of these things, the more that you kind of tap in and use it and connect with it, then the stronger it gets in a sense. And so that's good.
Those are fantastic questions. So in terms of how did it strengthen or become stronger in my awareness once I engaged it, I went from having kind of an old school television with like the ear, like the little rabbit ear antenna, and the picture was there, but it wasn't like really super clear, to now having like a full high def resolution panoramic view. And so what it is, it's just tuning in. All it is, it's paying attention. I went from diverting my attention away and trying to get it to stop and go away, to surrendering and opening and saying, okay, what is this and why is it here? So when I started to do that, then the visual acuity became more and more for me. So not only, I pretty much, the way I perceive, I see, hear, feel, and know, like it's just, I kind of have all of those different things open all the time, but my strengths are the visual and feeling. I can feel everything. So in terms of that, it's really like starting to just become curious. Okay. And understand, like with the visual stuff, sometimes we see stuff that's kind of, can be kind of frightening, right? We don't necessarily have control over what it is that we see. And at the same time, remembering we can have a whole other, podcast talk about duality at some point. We won't get too far off on a tangent about the light and the dark and what it contributes and why it is, etc. Just remember that even if you're seeing things like that, you're safe. There's nothing wrong with you. And there's a protocol. There's a way to be able to engage that with curiosity without, going off into some like traumatic event for yourself. Second, to answer the second part of your question, how I did that was by doing the hands-on practical stuff and really just listening to my intuition. My intuition's like, put your hands here, clear like this, or do this. Or I started to just play with my family and friends. That's how I started. I did 50 or 60 free sessions where I just listened to what I was being asked or guided to do. And over time, then it just began opening more and more. And I became more comfortable because then, like a big part of my stuff is being able to see the not so fun stuff. And that was really frightening for me. But once I kind of got a handle on, oh, wait a second, nothing to freak out about. It's just energy, right? So in terms of what it is, it's just a variation of the delineation of a vibration of love. It's just a very dense vibration of love. Why is it here? Like, become curious about it. And looking at things like that and starting in my modality, I got a little bit more sure-footed, or just kind of comfortable with the way that I was perceiving. And then the energy is it's like a lotus flower opening, and over time, the more you pay attention, the more you engage it, and you can be out and about and just be like, hey, intuition, I want to see a yellow balloon, and then like give it 24 hours and I bet your ass you'll see a yellow balloon. Like, you start playing games, and having some fun with it. It's creativity, it's vibrancy, it's love, it's you connecting to your higher self, and so you can make it fun.
You can make it fun. And you describe it beautifully. I think you bring up lots of really good points, because so many times, I mean, not just when you're working or experiencing energy or practicing or anything like that, it needs to be fun. But I think that's important for life too. I think so many times people forget that what the hell's the point of this whole experience of what we're experiencing if it isn't fun and you can't have joy in it and all those kind of things. But I do want to talk about the duality a little bit. I want to talk about the light and the dark, because I want to get your take and your perception and your idea about it. For me personally, you described it, I think, and my guess is this is probably kind of how you feel. It is all just energy, just one form or fashion or vibration of love. But especially having the experience that you've had in life from being a paramedic and seeing the things that you've seen and, the really shitty, terrible, traumatic, horrible things that you had to kind of move through. How did you come to terms with that idea that there's not necessarily bad or evil or negative energy, that it is all just love?
Oh, that is such a fantastic question. Um, it was really kind of two-part. One was myself becoming more educated in reading about and kind of delving into like some of the spiritual literature. I found myself having a lot of question because there's a lot of love and light talk, kind of denouncing darkness and that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, that's really interesting because look at the state of the world, and look at, like, I've had a really traumatic or I had a very traumatic and violent upbringing. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. A lot of darkness, right? So what is that? And again, in addition to that, being able to see, kind of entities and if you, for lack of better phrasing, just like demons or gargoyles or dragons or whatever, those types of visuals that are often associated with denser vibration. At first, when I was really first getting into it, I kind of drank the Kool-Aid and I was like, well, I just got to do love and light and I don't know why these are here, blah, blah, blah. But over time, like, I was really just like, okay, that doesn't really make sense to me, because essentially what it is, now I understand it to be in the tangible reality here in the third dimension. The point is to have a perceived sense of separation, right? Like, we're unity consciousness in higher levels of energy vibration and other realms and dimensions that are currently happening. But here in the tangible reality, as the human experience, we want to have that little perceived sense of separation, like, oh, I'm separate and I'm different from you. And in order to do that, what comprises that sense of separation is the light and the dark, the polarity, the duality, the paradox. That's a huge part of what this realm is about. And so without the light and the dark, neither could exist. The light couldn't exist. And so the highest, what I came to kind of understand is the highest high frequency of, like, if you want to say Christ-like vibration, oh, amazing, super yummy, feels good, it's beautiful, celestial, like a lot of that. And a lot of people love those, light vibrations because it feels good, it looks good, it's yummy. I totally get it. And at the same time, the exact polar counterpoint has to exist in this tangible reality for that light point to exist. And so when I started looking at it from that vantage point, I started taking away the dogma. I started taking away the spiritual bullshit. I started taking away a lot of the fear around it and kind of going like, okay, so these frequencies are not as fun to look at. They're not as pleasant. They don't feel as good. And at the same time, they're every bit as valuable or meaningful, just in the way of the energetics of the construct of how this reality is able to be. And so when I would do a session on somebody, perhaps maybe who was like gang raped, or somebody who had been doing meth for 20 years, and I put my hands on them, and all of a sudden I'd see this kind of entity, a very dark entity. And initially I thought I had to kind of battle it, or like, oh, I'm going to try to like do an exorcism or whatever. That was pretty elementary thinking on my point initially. And now what it is, it's a curiosity. It's the energetic vibration, whatever presentation it comes in. It can be not nasty and gnashing in my face and hissing and doing all of this stuff. And now I just look at it as energy. I see it as, well, it's here, right, in whatever session that I'm working with, whatever person I'm working with. It may be present. So why is it present? Is there a message? Is there a takeaway? What is it that in the subconscious of this person, this individual, that's wanting to be known, right? And so that's kind of how I look at it now. And it really, it took a huge load off, I tell you, because a lot of the stuff with the spiritual community and just kind of, I found it to be really like woo-woo, airy-fairy, out there, ungrounded with this love and this light. And I'm like, those are great concepts, you guys, but have you run a fucking 911 call? Like, there's some
shit out there.
There is some shit out there. And, it's not going to help these people that are in it like that to have this like preachy, etheric talk. It just doesn't resonate, And so I think, again, taking away the dogma, taking away the identity, that's another huge thing that I've come to see in the spiritual community, is so many people get so heavily identified with like, oh, I am this healer, or I am this, whatever. And it's like, well, okay, identity, is part of the ego's domain, right? That's okay. And at the same time, we can really limit ourselves or kind of get ourselves, shoot ourselves in the foot almost when we begin to identify with a lot of this stuff. And instead of just seeing like, how can I help? How can I contribute? Like, how can I show up? I'm a conduit, right? I have some of these capacities to be able to do what it is that I do, but it's not about me, right? In terms of like, oh, it's really about the the process of it and taking the fear, taking the attachment out, and just saying like being willing to let go of belief structures, right? Being willing to surrender attachment to identity, all of that kind of stuff begins to kind of wiggle and break free the more we open to the concept of everything just being energy and love. Yeah.
It's a wonderful, wonderful answer. I want to...
do tell. No, I'm just kidding.
So do you think that we'll just use that, the dynamic or the way that you explain sometimes when you see darker energy or lower vibrational things that they'll have, that you'll perceive them as like a demon or a dragon or something really negative or scary or what we would classify or define as scary, right? Do you think that perhaps that has more to do with, because I think that it doesn't matter what we look at. We could look at a flower and call it something completely different, but because we've decided to name that a flower over time and throughout history and all that kind of stuff, we have that kind of imprinted on our collective consciousness or on our DNA or whatever the case may be. Do you think that, because there's a lot of people, I'm getting lost because now my head is spinning in this thought process, but I don't think that there's evil, right? So I don't think that there's demons. I don't think that there's bad entities or anything like that. I don't believe in that. I just believe in energy as being love. But at the same time, I've seen, I have felt, I've experienced some of that darker stuff. And I think that the reason it shows up that way is because we have made it that way throughout history in this third dimension experience of, being humans on this planet or whatever the case may be.
Through dogma and belief structure, you mean?
Yeah. Where like we, along the line, and religion has a big part of it, I think, because it's been so present throughout history in regards to humanity and everything like that. And so I think it has less to do with the fact that there is really demons out there. But that's just how we can understand what we're seeing. So for you, you've been able to kind of see past the fact that it's not some negative entity that's taken over somebody's body and they need a clearing or a cleansing or an exorcism. It's just simple, a lower vibration.
Now that I've kind of been doing this for a minute and I've had, thousands of clients and really it's like running different 911 calls, but it's like doing the healing modality or genre work. And what I've come to understand is a lot of times people are wanting to put their pain, suffering, or trauma outside of themselves, and they're wanting to put their healing right outside of themselves, coming to somebody else to be healed. And I don't heal anyone. What I do is I can see through people's shit, right? And I can see all the way through their grid infrastructure, so we can get to the core wound traumas. We can get to the buried the subconscious patterning. And roughly 85% of the dark quote unquote entities and those types of vibrations that I see are actually the subconscious patterning of the individual in front of me. That's their shadow. It's their patterns that are wanting to come out to be integrated. Very rarely, and it does happen where I'm actually seeing things that are not of that person, right? It doesn't come from their upbringing, their grid infrastructure and their child patterning and all that kind of stuff. That's very rare, and it usually those types of things are less than 10% of what I see, and those will come usually with really volatile, explosive trauma, like gang rapes and family murders and long-term meth use, long-term ketamine use, long-term heroin use, long-term alcoholism, and a lot of sometimes people are getting into way out there in these psychedelic journeys, which can be very, very powerful and great tools when utilized efficiently and appropriately. And at the same time, some of those can just blow you sky high too. And sometimes energies that are not of that person's mainframe can get in there. But it's so not the typical standard. So like in terms of this, needing to do tons of exorcisms on people or things like that. No, it's really like, you want to face your core wounds and your deepest shit. Like that's really what this is, oftentimes. So that's been interesting to discover too.
Do you find that you help people with that the majority of the time, that you typically have clients that come to you, on a more like your regular client, I should say, or the person that you typically work with more commonly are people that are that you're helping them through that shadow side, through that darker stuff that they need to move through?
Yes. While finding their own personal empowerment and reconnecting to their joy. Because I mean, really, that's, yeah, to me, that's the juice right there. It's like there's no exalted anybody. It's like we're all spiritual beings just having this human experience, and we all have the capacity to thrive and to remember, our own greatness and our own power and our own awareness and our own health and vibrancy and abundance and love and joy and all of it, And so one of my that's what I do the most of, is doing almost like surgeries, psychic surgeries, and where it's kind of cutting through the layers and layers and layers of just cloaked energy to get to the core of what that is actually driving that individual. Yeah.
Do you think that you probably agree with both of these statements, but do you think that your ability to do what you do, that your connectedness to energy existed in order to push you into the field of becoming a paramedic? Or do you think that in becoming a paramedic, it helped push you into the field of working one-on-one with people?
I really think that my intuition took me through the paramedic route so I would have a mainframe awareness of Western medicine and anatomy, physiology, and energetic awareness on the basic level. Yeah, because I mean, it was coming in for me when I was pretty young to be a paramedic. And like I said, I didn't listen until I was in my early 20s. And that's when I finally jumped into it. But definitely, it's all layers, and now I look back, I'm like, Jesus, I did some crazy shit. It's like, well, okay, well, I see how that tied into the next thing. And I learned and I grew, and the fabric of my tapestry is more intricate, because I've gone through all of these different delineations and experiences of life to get myself. And I feel like we're all that. All of us do that. And so then it's like, oh yeah, okay, seeing how being a medic can lend to helping me do what it is I do now. And one of my favorite things is just talking to people. Like, I love it. I just love talking to people, like, in a way that they can hear, and then reminding them that the power is also within them, if they're really willing to cut the shit and let go of victim and let go of, the trauma and the identity and the addiction to trauma and the addiction to drama and things like that. Like, healing is possible for most everybody, if we're really just willing to allow that.
I totally agree. I know that you share a lot of experiences and stories and everything like that in your book. And I hope that this gives a whole new audience the opportunity to find it and everything like that. But if you would,
yay!
Can you share maybe it's one that you have in the book and maybe it's not, but one of the really profound experiences that you had in that space of being a paramedic, when you really kind of saw the greater, big, huge cosmic spin of the universe at play? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, totally. And I have a number of those stories outlined in the book. I'm going to tell you about one that wasn't, and that I didn't, because I mean, I got like a Rolodex of like 1,000, or thousands of experiences and calls. But I was in a relatively urban environment, and we got called. It was like a beautiful Thursday morning, sunny, 10 a.m., just like whatever, nice day. And we got called for a man down. And so we go into this house, and there's this young man laying flat on his back in cardiac arrest. So just turned 30 years old, healthy, Caucasian male. And the thing that struck me is I walked in, and so according to the wife, the man had just coughed and the side of his neck blew out and he dropped. So his carotid artery blew for whatever reason, and he just dropped dead. And he dropped dead in front of his wife and his two children. So when we walked into the house, there's this 7-year-old girl, and I just get goose flesh and just choked up at the thought of it right now, because I walked in and I wasn't prepared for what we were coming in on. And I locked eyes with this little girl, and her eyes were just saucered, right? And her mouth is wide open in an O, and she's just screaming bloody murder because she just watched her dad drop dead in front of her. And I froze for a moment, because all of the pain, all of the fear, all of the trauma that she was experiencing, that frenetic state, ricocheted into my body. And it's like I got blown back, not physically, but energetically 10 feet. And I was like, holy shit, what the hell? And it was at that moment that the energy did what it would do, and it came over the top. It came from a space kind of in between my shoulder blades, and it came over the top of my head, and it felt like I threw a bucket of water, like warm water, over the top of the scene. So here on the left, we're in a small apartment on the ground floor. I got the patient in front of me, the 2 children and the wife, and everybody's screaming, right? And then cops are like, trying to help, and it was just mayhem. And this energy goes over the top, and literally I felt, and it was so palpable and audible that even the cops and the firefighters stopped and looked around. And it was like this, it just went, and it dropped the energy intensity of the scene to the point it startled everybody. And then I was able to come in and start delegating, like, hey, you get the kids out of here, and you take the mom in the other room, and you start bagging and get on chest compressions. And it would just happen through me, right? And Sarah, in a momentary state of shock because of the pain of the girl that I had experienced physically. And then ultimately I came back into my body and started working with the energy. But that was one example. And, he passed, he died that day. And so that it was one of those things, and then it was a really intense scene and intense situation, and it was just really beautiful, honestly, to have the assistance of the energy in that capacity to be able to help orchestrate, right, and relinquish a bit of the chaos.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I want to ask you too, and beautiful doesn't do it justice. That's an amazing experience, and I know exactly. When I say I know exactly what you're talking about.
I know you know.
Yeah. And people have, anybody that's been around death in any way, shape, or form, I think can feel the density that exists in that space. And a lot of times people don't have words to describe it or verbalize it, but they can feel it, obviously. And then when you bring some sort of awareness or higher consciousness, I suppose, to that space, I think it helps so much. How big of an issue, because this is the other thing now that my brain's getting sidetracked, how big of an issue do you think it is, or how did you see it play out in regards to like the people that you worked with and your coworkers in regards to experiencing and seeing and being in those spaces so frequently? So like I'm talking about PTSD and how whether it affected you personally or how you would see it kind of play out and affect the people that you worked with.
Are you talking just EMS? Or are you talking,
or even
I don't understand your question.
Even like in the whole field, because I think that PTSD is one of those things that people don't really take for, it's not that they take it for granted, but they think that you have to experience some, do you know what I mean? It's going to be the soldier that's coming home from war. It's going to be somebody that, suffered some crazy traumatic experience as a child or something like that, where I think they don't take into consideration that day in and day out repetitive exposure to traumatic experiences, even though you become numb to a certain extent because you have to operate through them, they still have kind of compounding effects upon you. And so did you see that? Did you experience that?
Myself personally, yes. And in my coworkers, tremendously. I love my brothers and sisters in EMS and PD, and that's one of my, I love EMS, and at the same time it is one of the densest, most toxic environments on the planet, the 911 system. And so to be living in that by choice, day in and day out, what I would see is a lot of numbing out, through food and through alcohol, and there's a lot of addictions running through EMS. And with myself, what I started to notice, like I've always exercised a lot. That's helped me channel a lot of this extra stimulus that I got going. And, I would find it really important to manage my diet appropriately and continue with my exercise regime, and then take time off. Like I would work full-time hours, but I was part-time so I could build my schedule. And then there would be times when I just needed to not be in that environment so that I could regroup, energetically. And it's a very dense environment. And what's the good news or kind of thing that it warms my heart is I've actually had a lot of people from the field, a lot of firefighters, some cops, some detectives, some even some physicians come to see me now and, kind of let their guard down a little bit with it. And so it's moving. It's like a glacier slowly starting to melt. Like the thing is really intact. There's a lot of that kind of the ego and the alpha and the like, I got this, nothing can faze me. So that's all present. That's fine. And at the same time, we're all still human, so providing people now, serving kind of my brothers and sisters in EMS the way that I do now through, helping them to clear some of that stuff out is really nourishing to me.
Yeah, that was the next question I kind of had for you because I think that's one of the things that's lacking in the field of all of those different professions where everybody's experiencing all of this really traumatic shit. Nobody's really talking about it and nobody's really doing anything to deal with it other than in unhealthy ways. And it's not everybody, we're kind of stereotyping to a certain extent, but it was hard for me. Like I was really hard pressed after, I left law enforcement to look back and think, and I'm like, I don't really think I know anybody that did anything on a really conscious level of dealing with the things that they had to deal with on a daily basis. And my guess is that it's probably really similar. You worked in a much bigger metropolitan area than I did. But at the end of the day, you still deal with that shit and it still kind of affects you and nobody's really doing anything about it from what I can see.
There's a reason that most cops and firefighters are dead within 5 years of retirement. There's a reason.
Yeah.
And it's because of that. And at the same time, it's like, okay, choice point, right? And so that's what I like to do. And that's what I like to advocate. Number one is that we can start talking about the things we're experiencing on scene with the energetic frequencies. We can talk about that in a grounded, practical way that doesn't offend physicians, doesn't offend like people in EMS, and people can kind of, or just general people can be open to it, right? Can receive it, right? And be like, oh, okay, wait a second. Yeah, I've actually experienced something like that. It's not weird. It's not woo woo. It's not, out there. We can just be like, okay, kind of, this is this, tell me about your experience. And then how are you taking care of self with that? Like, what can you do with that? And so, we're a very unique breed, people, first responders. We have that streak in us that allows us to be able to show up in that space and time for those people. And at the same time, it can be a very finite and limited time in the field. And so like when I was in 13 years and I left at the height of my career, like it was really terrifying for me because I was senior medic and I got every shift I wanted and I was high paid. I had all of it. And at the same time, my intuition was like, you have more to do. You have to get out. You have to, delineate your energy. And so I'm super glad now that I did and looking back at some of my coworkers who are still really in it. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of hurt there. So it's something.
It is something. Sarah, I'm super glad that I got the chance to talk with you. I think we could probably sit and chat for a very long time about a whole bunch of different cool shit.
We could talk about different stuff forever.
Yeah. It's sarahkgrace.com, right?
sarahkgrace.com and Journey into Grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic, available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback.
Yeah. And then if people want to get a hold of you individually and they want to work with you or contact you in any way, what's the best way for them to do that?
They could either email Sarah at sarahkgrace.com or just go onto the website, sarahkgrace.com, and find me there. And I do, it's been really beautiful, Craig, because since we published the book 8 months ago, so I self-published. And it's just, it's just time. People are ready for the conversation. It's just time. And it's really being demonstrated because I've been fortunate enough now where the book is sold internationally. And I was fortunate enough to be a guest on Hay House Radio, and it just is, it's happening. So we're already going international with this message, which is just really grounded practical application of high sense ability or high sense perception. And it's just time. So thank you for having me on here and continuing the conversation. And I look forward to getting to know you and your wife even more. And this is exciting.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Everybody go out and have a beautiful, wonderful day.
Nothing to freak out about. It's just energy. I would begin to watch the chakras releasing from the body and then the soul going out the crown of the head. You just feel things? Do you take on everybody's shit? Oh, okay. Well, you're probably an empath. Everything's just a different delineation of energy.